Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 118 of the podcast. Today is Monday, May 6th, 2024, as I record this. And today we're talking to Joe Field about living your best creative life. We talk about where he draws his inspiration, how he upholds his creativity, and how he balances that with his life. We go into all the little fun details of his publishing and the many decisions that he's made as a result of his self-publishing. I think you'll want to stick around for that conversation. Now, in terms of updates this week, it was actually a relatively slow week from a homesteading standpoint. This was one of the first Saturdays in years where we didn't have something very specific that we needed to get done. I mean, there's always a list. There's never not a list. But this was one Saturday where we didn't have impending deadlines on things to get done. So we spent time out in the garden, getting it weeded, putting weed fabric down. We're prepping. We kind of cut down a bunch of raspberry canes. We want to start over with raspberries. The raspberry bushes that were there before were just not doing very well. So hoping to replenish the ground, kind of burn down what's there and replant with some new plants. So that's currently the plan there. Um, and also just kind of yard cleanup because we have a lot of thistle. If you know anything about thistle, it's a very annoying weed that is not only painful to touch, but it's very pervasive. It spreads far and wide if you don't take care of it. Unfortunately, we do have a neighbor. She doesn't actually live there. It's just like it's a lot that she has a storage garage on for her toys, boats and four-wheelers and things. She's not there very often. So there's sometimes some thistle that goes a little bit crazy and spreads everywhere. So we're trying to manage that. And yeah, other than that, I've got the lawnmower up and running and mowed the lawn. It's now going to become a regular thing now that the grass is growing and it's green. So yeah, relatively boring in terms of homesteading. Although this next week we will be preparing for chicks to hatch. So we gathered 14, oh no, 14 days ago rather, we gathered 21 eggs to hatch, and they've been, brooding or just hanging out in the little warming machine so that they can hatch this week. It takes, I think, 21 to 23 days for them to hatch, so they should start hatching on Saturday. I just have to need to prepare their little house so that we can put them in there. So far, of the 21, only four were duds, which I think is a pretty good hatch rate. Hopefully, they survive. We'll have to see. Last year, it was a much lower rate of success. A lot of them were duds or didn't have chicks growing in them. So hopefully, this year we see more success, and we have a bunch of new breeds, egg-laying breeds in there. So should be fun to see the different colors and how they hatch out because it's hard to know with the matchups of the different hens and roosters that we have. But yeah, that's next week. So this last week, very, very few updates. We are getting close to the cats being ready to find new homes. They are just short of 9 weeks old, and they're eating food and water, and they seem to be thriving. They're doing great. So they're very social, which is good. Hopefully that makes it easy to find them new homes. We'll keep a couple of them. Of course, we need some good mousers. Two doesn't seem to be enough. We were managing the mice so much better when we had four at any given time. So we'll probably keep two of them, and then the other three will find new homes, either with our neighbors or anybody else locally. So that should be fun. Um, and then yeah, other than that, we've just been getting a lot of rain. We were hoping to do a big burn. We have a big pile of sticks and wood that we need to get rid of, and we've never done a burn before, but it's all piled up high. We just need to wait for a non-wet day. It's unusual to say in Idaho because wet days don't come very often. Recently, it's been very, very wet, so nothing's gonna burn today. We need a few days of non-wetness. I'm sure I would be able to get them burning a little bit, but it would smoke like crazy, and it'd be a little bit of a fight to get it to light up. I'd rather make it a little bit easier and just wait. I mean, it's not really in the way. We've got plenty of land, just sitting there and waiting to get burned. Well, let's see. Other than that, in terms of updates, I did update the website a little bit for the podcast with some link to some other locations. You can listen to this podcast anywhere, but I know it's a little bit hard to find unless you're following the show directly on that podcast streaming system. Sometimes it's tricky to find. So I put some additional links in there to make it easier for you. And then I've also updated some of my links within social media just to make it easier to find the podcast. Linktree, before I was using something else, but Linktree does a really cool thing where you put in your podcast feed and it'll bring up all the various locations where you can listen to it. So I updated that just to make it a little bit easier in an effort to try to get a little bit more forward movement on some of the books I'm working on today. I have started formatting the paperback cover for Dragon Blooded. I've come to a place where I'm at about 80 to 85% confidence that the six covers I have put together for the Hidden Heritage series are good. The first and second books I'm pretty sold on. The third book needs some work, but the other three, four, five, and six are doing pretty well. I want to so I'll back up and say this. My wife really likes to read my books, obviously, before I publish them, but she prefers print versions. So historically, I've gone to a printer, just got a spiral bound version, 8 by 10 of the books. They're not overly pricey, but they're also not cheap, right? To print that. It can be anywhere from, depending on how big the book is, how many pages it is, anywhere from $20 to $40, depending on how many pages. And I thought about it, and realistically, if I can get the format, I could come up with just a fake cover, but if I can get the paperback cover put together, then I can do a dual purpose proof copy where I can print it just to make sure the cover looks as good as I think it's going to, and then also give that copy to my wife to read. So I think it's gonna turn out great. I'm nowhere near publishing. I think, I do have to go through probably another round of edits or two, and then of course the copy edit and or proofread. So that still needs to happen prior to publishing it. But until then, I figure let's test out this cover. Let's see if I can format it, get it printed. Let's get a proof printed at any one of these places, and then my wife can mark it up and we can go from there. So I think it's going to help spur some motion on it. I am still continuing to write the third book. I've only written, maybe 5 to 10,000 more words on Dwarf Blooded, but it's exciting. I've written nearly 4 books now without having, something to hold. And I need to hold something. You need some evidence of the work that you put into it. So I'm looking forward to getting that. I don't anticipate that it's going to take too long, but probably I know I doubt I'll have it done before next week. We'll see on how quickly I can format it. I'm pretty pleased that the ebook cover is converting to the paperback cover relatively well. Pretty happy with how it bleeds around the spine and into the back. It was unintentional. The image that I was using just needed to get blown up, and then it's just a stock image of fire, and the flames bleed onto the back in a very nice way. So, as long as it comes out in print as well as it looks in digital format, then I think it's going to be great. But it's hard to say until I actually print that out. It is the beginning of May. I tried to, at the beginning of the month prior to the Writers of the Future due date, to start another short story. For a while there, it wasn't that I didn't have creativity. I have tons of ideas somewhere in the back of my mind. I'm just not good at writing them down, which is my problem, right? It's a known issue, and it's something that I still am just not disciplined enough to fix. But that being said, when I got to this, I was thinking, I don't know what to write, right? It was not I don't have ideas. I just have no idea which one I want to start with. Ultimately, I did come up with a plan, a relatively loose plan, and I did start writing my next short story, which I'm pretty happy with it so far. I've only written 2,000 words, but it's pretty cool. And I think I'm gonna have a hard time not wanting to. This is the danger when writing short stories, not wanting to write a series off of this. But I'll tell you a little bit more as we get closer to me actually being finished with it because I don't know fully what it's going to become quite yet until I actually write it. But 2,000 words is a pretty good amount under my belt. I think if I can get roughly 1,000 to 2,000 words per day of writing, then I could be done with this short story in 2 weeks or less, which would be awesome. And then sit on it, sit it off to the side, keep writing Dwarf Blooded, working on covers, and then come back to it for some pretty intensive rounds of edit before, the next month. June, I'll spend editing it, and then I'll submit it for Writers of the Future. So I think it's great to have that deadline for Writers of the Future. If anything, it's getting me to just write these quick short stories, exercise my muscle of creating something, and it's honestly so nice to be able to start and finish something relatively quickly. It helps you regain some of that energy from writing these longer novels. I don't get sick of writing them, but yeah, there's just something so satisfying about being able to write at the end. Um, but in terms of author updates, I think that's everything. Just plugging along and enjoying writing, just keep doing what I'm doing. So that being said, I don't have any other updates. We can shift over to the interview portion with Joe. Hey Joe, how are you doing today?
Hey, I am doing fantastic. And how are you doing today in the hidden gem state of Idaho?
Oh, not finding hidden gems, I can tell you that much. But no, it's we're enjoying it. I love it here. It's a great place. Remind me where you're located.
I'm based in the great state of Minnesota, the North Star
Minnesota.
State. Yeah, have you ever been there before?
I have, yes. I spent a couple weeks there.
Nice.
I have an uncle that used to live there. Can't remember where I was like 10 when I went, but they have a
Right.
little farm in Minnesota and we went up for the
Nice.
summer. It was fun.
Yeah, yeah. Summer's a good time to visit. There's usually a lot of mosquitoes around, but you also get the lake time. So yeah, it's a great place to be from, I'll say.
I do remember the mosquitoes, actually. That was one of the things that, but it was, yeah, it's a great little place. So before we get into
Nice.
all the fun stuff, how long have you been writing and publishing?
So I started writing for other human being consumption in 2016. This
Okay.
year I wrote and published self-published my first book. And so I've been doing it for 8 years steady. And I think I have about a dozen books on the shelf to show for it.
Nice.
So yeah.
Okay, so you write fantasy, superhero. Let's see, what else did I miss something in terms of
Yeah, I
genre?
think I kind of like I'm similar to you. I write a few different genres, but when I first started, I started writing crime thrillers. So my
Oh,
first three
okay.
books, you
Huh.
won't even see them on my website. My first three books are crime thrillers. And those were just to cut my teeth. That was from 2016 to like 2019. So I started writing superhero in 2020 when I launched Legends Universe. And as a part of that world, I also write, YA, Western fantasy, and then now more like action adventure is what I would place myself in it for my Buffalo Man books. So those are
Okay.
my genres. Yeah.
So are you a mood writer then? Is that what I'm hearing? Kind of like a mood reader, only writing. You just kind of write what you feel like writing.
I had this weird idea that I would write books from basically birth all the way up till adult. So I have
Okay.
like I don't have my, chapter books or not my chapter books. I don't have like my illustrated children's book yet, but I have middle grade kids, YA, new adult, regular adult. So I'm trying to span the whole cradle to grave here. So
I mean, but I really enjoy that. Some people say that that's challenging to build a business off of because
Mhm.
you've got all the different age groups. A lot of times people will write specifically to one niche, one target group, and that's all they focus on. I mean, if you want to do that, I think that's excellent. Have you found trouble finding your readers with having such a big reader base that you're not targeting?
At first, yeah, because when I started writing superhero books, I was writing them for adults because there's really
Mm,
not that many good superhero books for adults. Not, I mean, comic books are amazing. There's a ton of those, but actual novel length books. And so I wrote them for adults. Well, then my wife had this idea, and I started getting all this feedback like, I love these books, but what about the kids? The kids want to know the characters and all. So
got it.
that was really the impetus for adapting them as a middle grade books as well, my first series, so that adults could read it and have adults, stuff in it. And then kids could read it, same plot, same structure, characters, but tamper down on violence or anything else in it. So that's kind of how that started. And then from there, I sort of expanded it with that idea of like cradle to grave, kind of what Disney Plus is trying to do now, merging all Hulu and all their adult and kid content together.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I saw that happening, and I mean, as long as they have age restrictions on the channel, it's fine. It doesn't
Yeah,
bother me. But no, I think
right.
that's a really cool perspective to have. And so, just clarification: you're rewriting? Is it like a rewrites of your adult books in child form, or are they just like side stories in child form?
So really, I did that with my first series, my Arrowhead Legends series, which started with Axel Holt. It was a 5 book series, start to finish, and it had an endpoint. And I just adapted them to middle. So I didn't do a full rewrite, but it actually took a while because you got to go in and you have to really think about like this important plot point, which is a relationship between these two adults. How can I sort of remove that element and still keep the story in place that has
Mm,
impact for kids? And so that was the hardest part about it. So it's again like an adult and a kid, it'd be like an adult watching like a PG-13 version of the movie, and then your kids watching like the PG version, in their room, and then talking about it. And they'd be able to talk about it, with the exception of a few, relationship type things. So
that's very cool. I mean, I've never thought about doing something like that. It seems overwhelming, honestly, to edit it in that way.
it's a
But
lot. It's a lot of work. Double covers, double everything.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was a lot, but the feedback was worth it, and the kids love it. So.
So do you have kid beta readers then that were giving you feedback about your kid story?
I do. I do. I have, my kids and as well as nieces, nephews. Yeah. And then I've some of my readers, early readers, that jumped on my kids series, like my first Axel Holt kids version. I had this kid reach out through his mom, and he's still like one of my biggest super fans today. And he would give me feedback, which was very valuable, right?
That's very
Have someone
cool.
that's not related to me. And then I had another kid in West Virginia do the same thing. He was like, I love your books better than Harry Potter. This is so much better. Harry Potter's so boring. I love your books. Here's my feedback. I'm like, oh, wow. That's amazing. So yeah, so like that was awesome feedback to get as you're writing these books or adapting them for kids.
I mean, that's awesome. What an excellent validation point for you. Better than Harry
Right.
Potter. You
I
definitely won
know,
that
I
child's
know.
heart.
Well, if you ask my daughter, she would be like, your books aren't even close to Harry Potter. But for this kid, he loved them.
Well,
So
our kids tend to be kind of savage about our works. It can be positive though. It's like, all right, that's great
right.
feedback. I appreciate it. My son also
Yeah,
likes to read everything that I write, which is very fun. And I don't even just
that is
write, he
cool.
writes the adult stuff too. Um,
Nice.
he doesn't
Nice.
understand all the complex themes, but he reads
Right.
them and gets at least the action points. So I want to talk a little about living
Yeah.
your best creative life, primarily because you and I are very similar in that we've got kids, we have full-time jobs, we probably have a lot of
Hmm.
things going on in our lives.
So
And for
much.
you, you've written a bunch of things, which is awesome. You've made a lot of
Mm.
progress with your author business. How do you maintain your best creative life?
Yeah, I have three tips. Like if I was doing a TED Talk, this would be my three
Love TED Talks. Let's do
three.
it.
I know. I
Author
know. This
TED
would be my
Talk.
three keys for living your best creative life. So my first one is measured perseverance. And I don't say just
Okay.
perseverance because everyone's heard just 10,000 hours, just stick to it and you're going to do it, you're going to achieve. Now, for some things that's true, but for something like this, I say measure perseverance. Let me give you an example. I played football growing up, loved football, tackle football, and I played all the way into college. I played wide receiver. Now,
Nice.
I am super quick from A to B. I can get across my office like that, like flash. But my breakaway speed and my 40-yard dash was average, not even like it was just average, right? And so I knew I could pursue this. I could pursue a full college career and then see, what I could do. Or I could cut bait because that consumed like 90% of my waking hours in college and focus my attention on someone else. So it was like this measured perseverance of pursuing something that could lead somewhere versus just persevering for perseverance sake. Because you only have
Mm,
so much time.
yeah.
You only have so much time. If I start writing books and the feedback I get is you're terrible, and then after I write 5 books, is like I still can't even finish one chapter, Joe. And I just I persevere, and I'm getting all sorts of feedback, and it's pretty negative. Like, is it worth pursuing that long term? I don't know. You might get good eventually, 10, 20 years, but maybe, that's not the correct form of art that you should pursue. Maybe video, something else, or painting, or whatever it is. So that's my first key. Measure perseverance. For all the kids listening, just like whatever you go into, try it out. And if it seems like something that could take off, you just measure that perseverance and, and,
Hmm.
and go forth.
So
So
don't burn yourself out doing something that might not go anywhere. I think that's a really important
exactly.
perspective to have. Some people may hear this and say, "Oh, you're telling me to give up if it's not working." But no, that's not what you're saying. You're saying don't
Mm,
sink time into something that doesn't appear to have even minor gains in terms
right.
of progress or cash or whatever it is you're measuring at that time. So,
Right.
did you ever struggle with that with your current author career, or did you find that you had with the measuring of your perseverance that you felt like it was always worth it to keep pushing forward?
I certainly have had struggles. I think every author goes through this where you're sort of like, can I even call myself an author? Maybe I'll
Mm,
call myself a writer, but can I call myself an author? Like, am I a poser? Am I this? Am I that? And especially when you're self-publishing books, right? You get validation if you send a query letter out and you get an agent and you get published by some traditional. So that's got validation, right? But if you're going alone and doing it yourself, there's certainly that doubt like, do I want to do this? Because, for publishing, for authors, you really don't see the fruits of your labor for 5, 10 years, or maybe later, even in life. Like once the
Hmm.
series is finished, I've been doing this for 8 years. I have certainly now in the last few years started to see, this thing is growing into something bigger than just like, like a little side thing. And so it would have been easy to quit after, writing my crime thriller books. But I saw where I could go and I saw that I was progressing with my books. I was getting that feedback from, people that matter to me. And so, yeah, so I certainly had that doubt. I don't know if you've had those similar doubts, but
Oh, absolutely. Recently, even coincidentally, I've only in the past like week thought, okay, I think I'm ready to dive back in and push forward a little bit more on some of these more difficult business aspects of the author career, so to speak. But yeah, I totally understand that. I'm curious to know what advice you have for someone who is in just the perseverance stage. You know, they're not measuring, they're just kind of like, I'm just pushing forward, not seeing a lot of gains. Where do you, yeah, recommend they start in terms of measurement?
I would look at it like this first internally. I would look at it, and maybe we'll talk about music today because I'm also a musician, but what I see is that like when you're playing music or you're writing books, if you're the type of musician that won't just pick up your instrument, whatever that is, and just play it for fun and just do it sort of just just for the heck of it because you enjoy doing it, it might be really difficult long term to stick with it enough to get good enough compared to everyone else that's doing it, right? How many gazillion people are writing books now because it's so much easier, to create books, to self-publish, and it's a legacy thing. I would say that if you don't get any enjoyment out of creating books, and I admit myself, my first book, man, that was like work. I was like, this is a chore to write this book. Now where I'm at today is this an absolute like pleasure. Like I get in the flow state when I write now, and 3 hours feels like 3 minutes have gone by. And once you
Hmm.
get to that point, then it's amazing. I could do it forever now. But until you get to that point, that's at least for me, that's where the doubt crept in. Like, do I want to grind at something that I'm not enjoying for what? Like I could go play golf. I could go do anything else, right? Like could do whatever other leisure activity. So I would say internally think about, is this something you like to do just to do it and you get pleasure out of it? Or can you see a path to getting to the point where you could create a book or whatever you're creating in a way that's really brings you enjoyment while you're doing it?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you brought that up. So I do want to talk about music. So I want to make sure we have time for that.
Mhm.
On that note, it's the second key to living your best creative life. You want to dive into that?
So the second key is get lots of creative inspiration. And for me, I love to travel.
Okay.
I love to travel. And when I travel, and okay, so 0.25 of 1% of America. So a fraction of 1% of Americans ever make it to all 50 states in their lifetime. And it's usually when they're retired and they buy the RV, right? And they do road
Hmm.
tripping. I wanted to flip that. I wanted to experience all 50 states by like the time I was 30. Now I was a couple years late, but I did it. And if we have time later, I'll tell you my Idaho story. But I made it all 50 states. And as well as I've been to 6 continents. I'm just waiting on Antarctica. My wife says she's allergic to the cold, so we haven't gone there yet. But I've been like 50, 60 countries overseas. But more than just traveling there, when I travel, I look at it through like a writer's prism, like a writer's lens, where I'm taking things in. I'm taking in design elements. I'm taking in speech. I'm taking in like little idiosyncrasy things that 99% of people that travel or experience life just miss. They just miss. They go and they look at the tourist thing. So I'm going and I'm capturing these ideas, this creative inspiration through museums and through art and through these experiences. And I think there's a lot of ways. I do it through travel, but you could do it through music. You could do it through reading. If you can't travel, you could do it through reading. You could read a lot of books in a lot of different genres. I would argue that you can't do it as much through consuming TV and movies unless you're doing it in a way that's constructive, where you're kind of like dissecting the stories and you're thinking about it from that. So that's my second point. Lots of creative inspiration, so you have strings to pull on in the different scenes of your book.
So I agree with you, and I think that is very important. what advice do you have if time is very short? How do you know you're picking the right activities to fill your creative font, so to speak?
So for me, so I used to start writing notes. I don't know if you do this, but whenever I capture something in real life that I want to incorporate into a story, I used to use like my iPhone notes, and I had for a little while I tried just a notepad, which didn't work. I tried to email myself. So I use
Hmm.
Google Keep. I use Google
Okay.
Keep. It's a free note-taking app that I have on my phone. All you need is a Gmail, and it saves it instantly. But it's the best form of notes. And Apple tried to create a similar version of Google Keep. It's not as good. I can in one note have like a character from one of my book series, let's say Buffalo Man. I can have a note just for Buffalo Man. And anytime I see or experience something, I can put it on there. It could be a picture, it could be a video, it could be text. I have it all right there. So I can look at my phone, on my computer. I can email the whole thing to myself. I can email it to a designer. And so I capture those moments as they occur in life. And so I know for me, when I travel, I capture so many things. I'm always in my different Google Keep notes. I probably have 150 for different characters, different books, different stories that I'm capturing. So if you're whatever creative pursuit you're going after, if you're not getting that, if you're not getting those little tidbits, those connecting those strings, well, maybe try something else. Because
Hmm.
if you're just binge watching Netflix all day long and all you got out of it was a funny name, I mean, that could be enough for some people.
Some people.
But like, like to think about something that might be more enhancing, right? Going to the Louvre in Paris might give you 150 story ideas. Going to Las Vegas for the weekend, with or without your family might give you 100, whatever it
Hmm.
might be. So,
Yeah, and on this vein, actually, books do fill my creative font, but coincidentally, music does it the most for me. Just in
mm,
this scheme of busy life, I Um, learned at a young age. I've always been a storyteller. Never thought that I'd ever write books, but
yeah,
learned at a young age that my brain is activated with music, and so I can just close my eyes and listen to all sorts of different forms of music, and usually my brain will create a story during the song. And it'll kind of follow the beats of the music. And I remember when I was actually doing some service in the Philippines. One of the guys that I was rooming with, he he learned this and it became a game for him. He would pick a random song and let me listen to
no
it and then
way.
just say, describe whatever. And he would be fast. He's like, where did you come up with these stories? Every
That is
single song was
awesome.
just completely different. So that's where it is for me. I always take the time every day to flip on some music. I've got a playlist. I also like to find new things and just let my mind wander and do with what it wants with it. And that fills it for me. But kind of
Yeah,
fun.
that's super cool. Yeah. Do you play as well or just listening?
I play the piano a little bit. That's not as
Yeah.
much as I would like to, but I'm more of a by ear player. I can
Yeah.
read music. I'm just not great at reading music. But yeah,
Right. No, that's
so we'll
cool.
get to the music bit in a minute because I love
Yep.
the filling your creative font thing. So let's get to key three. What is the third key to living your best creative life?
The third part is probably the hardest part. That's finding your original voice. And it's
Okay.
hard to know if you even have it. I mean, you'll know when you have it because I know when I found mine, but it's never about what. You and I can use the same tropes like every other author out there, and they've all been done under the sun, but it's about how you do it. It's about how you do that matters. Like, so my example I use is I'm a huge Minnesota Vikings fan,
Okay.
unfortunately. And
Okay.
we're 0 and 4 in the Super Bowl. But back in the 60s and 70s, we had a team. Again, they didn't win the Super Bowl. They won a lot of games. They never won the big one. They were referred to as the Purple People Eaters
Hmm.
because our defense was so insanely good. It wasn't just that they were good, it was how they played the game. They changed. It's like they looked like real life Vikings that would own the offense. And it got to the point where people just knew about the Purple People Eaters, and people that didn't even know football or didn't have a favorite team, they became Vikings fans, right? And their kids became Vikings fans. It wasn't about what, because we didn't win any trophies. It was how they played the game that endeared people to them. It's the same with writing. We all, we have our own original voice that we find. And I found it by about book 3 or 4 for me, where I started to figure like, okay, this is my style, this is my flow. And so you can read my books and you can be like, okay, yeah, this is Joe's book. and I can see how he does it. And so that's the hardest part, is finding that original voice. But when you do, that's a signature thing. So those are three keys: measure perseverance, get lots of creative inspiration, and finding your original voice.
Okay. So it's hard to speak to exactly when you might feel that you've reached that point because, some people may feel they're there and they're not, or some people may be there and they don't feel like they're there. But how I think the bigger question for a lot of authors is how to gain confidence in that original voice, right? Because you've got constant feedback from, I'm going to just use
Mhm.
social media as an example, right? It's not the only example of people looking for very specific things or people who have issues with very specific things, whatever those things are. We don't have to get into the details. And,
Right.
we're receiving that as authors, that feedback, not necessarily about our own books, but just about books in general. And so if you identify, oh, well, my original voice has some of elements of those things that people are kind of loud about on social media. How do you have
Right.
confidence that, hey, it's okay, this is your original voice and it is good and there are people who will enjoy it when there's just so much negativity about it?
I
Does that
think
question make sense?
yeah, no, I'm tracking. I think it goes back to why, answering the question why you write.
Sure.
Because if you don't answer that, then like how do you figure out? Because a lot of people, it depends what you're doing. Like if you're writing to make this your full-time job to make
Hmm.
money, you sort of have to write to market, and maybe those
Sure.
are more influences in terms of how your book turns out. For me, like my main reason why I write is for my kids, my hopefully future grandkids, for people that I won't even meet, as an inspiration to them. Like, hey, old Grandpa Joe was a writer. He can do it. I can do it, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So that's like my one main reason. A second reason is I just want to create a book like I did for, a child of North Dakota, a child of West Virginia, where it's their favorite book of all time. And
Hmm.
I think I could do that if I wasn't writing in my own original voice with a story how I wanted to create it, right? I might not have as big of a mass appeal to the mass market, but for the people that like my books, it's their favorite. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not like 3 or 4 star. It's like a 5 star review. This is my favorite. I've read it 5 times. So I think if a writer's feeling that, like, how do I find my original voice? I would say just lean into why are you even writing in the first place? And maybe let that be your guiding principle for if you have found it and is it, if it's true, genuine to who you are.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that makes sense. And hopefully it'll help. I love your example of you're not J.K. Rowling, right? Not everybody knows your
Right.
faith, but you have a set base of readers who really enjoy your work. And I mean, Joe Penn talks about this all the time on her podcast
Mhm.
about how a very small, 1,000 avid readers
Right.
can be an excellent place to start. I mean, I know that's a lot, but you don't need
Yeah.
to be the world's favorite author. You really just need people who really enjoy your voice. And focusing on that and finding those readers can help you build confidence, I think, as you get
Yeah, I thought
the
it was
right
super. I
feedback.
thought it was super, super cool that you had Joe Penn on your show. I definitely follow her, and she's got so many good, little tidbits. And so that was, yeah, it was neat. That was neat that you had her on.
It was a delightful conversation. She is equally as nice and friendly in person and well, digitally as she is on her
Right, right,
podcast.
right.
So not that I was surprised by that, but it's just a really awesome conversation. So
Yeah, it
music,
was.
what instruments do you play
Yeah,
first off? I'm assuming you play more than one. So you seem like that kind of
yeah.
person. Okay.
Yeah. So my main instrument is piano,
Okay.
but I also play guitar, acoustic guitar, electric guitar. I played trombone growing up, middle school, high school band, jazz band, pep band. I'm also a songwriter, so
Okay.
I write songs, country, folk songs mostly, storyteller songs, and then just dabble with a whole lot of other instruments. But those would be my main ones. I would say, piano, guitar, and then songwriting. So. Those are my
But no banjo?
those are my man. So it's funny you mentioned I actually I think it was sometime last year. My wife's like, what's a crazy gift I get you? I was like, what about a banjo? She's like, no, I don't think we need that in the house right now.
Nix, you didn't get that idea. But so
Yeah,
it sounds like you have the capacity and potential to write epic theme songs for all of your books. Is that something that you spend time doing?
I do. Well, I do more so now. So my current series, Buffalo Man, as a part of book one, there's a character in there that might have some similarities to me. and he wrote in the book the Buffalo Man theme song that he
Okay.
performed for Buffalo Man. And so I, recorded it and put it on my YouTube channel. But then there's also this character in Choke Cherry, North Dakota, which is like my version of Gotham City in central
Okay.
North Dakota. Just imagine having like a 1 million person city in central North Dakota. That's like Gotham City. That's where my stories take place. And it's this children's music performer who gets fired from his job as a teacher, and he's making these like goofy children's music videos. And so I actually made a bunch of songs about that on my podcast, and then I put them on my YouTube with animated videos. And so I'm doing a lot more of that now, just to kind of incorporate that element into my universe.
I mean, that's really cool. And I love that you make the time to do that because it just adds another element to the story, particularly if you end up sharing that music in whatever
Hmm.
place. There's another author. I don't know if you've ever heard of Charlie Holmberg.
Oh,
She
that sounds familiar. Yeah.
she wrote the Paper Magician series. It's really the only one I've
Mm.
read. I don't know that I've read any one of her other books, but she also writes piano scores for some of her
Mm.
books and she shares them on social media and she makes them, you can purchase the song, I think, but it's just an extra touch. And,
Mhm.
I can imagine that bolsters your creativity and just, sucks you and the reader into the world in one
It
way or
does.
the other. But I'm curious to know, how does that affect your ability to create, taking the time to write songs?
I would say for me, okay, so I know you're I know you're a discovery writer.
I am.
Now, yep.
You're not, I'm
I
assuming.
No, not at all. So I'm definitely
Okay.
a plotter, outliner. I would say it like this. So for me, well, let's use music as an example. Okay, so if I'm doing piano improv where someone says, Joe, I want you to sit down at the piano. I want you to just create a song from scratch. Just sit down and do it. Now, if I just sat down and I didn't think of anything ahead of time, I was a discovery piano player. I would just start playing and kind of hitting keys, and I would try to piece together a melody, piece together some sort of a bass line, and try to build it out like that. Now I've done that, and it might take months, if not years, for me to finish a song. And sometimes they sound okay, sometimes they sound like a little wonky. And so the other avenue, the other approach is this would be the outliner, the plotter version. If I was sitting down on the piano and before I started to play, I picked the key, the chord progression. Let's just say simple key. Like I want my mood to be bright. So I just pick the key of C. And then my chord progression, I pick the three chords I want to use. And then the format. So for composing music, the most simple format is ABA. So, think about it like books, acts one, two, and three. ABA. So A is your first melody, might be 8 to 16 bars. B is a contrasting melody, might be the same 8 bars. And then A, again, for a resolution, maybe you change a little bit. So if I do that and I sit down at the piano, I could sit down at a public piano in an airport thinking about that for 30 seconds and I could play a 5 minute song and casual listeners would be like, that's amazing. He's probably been playing that his whole life. I just made it up on the spot because I limited my focus. So all I had to think about was playing. I already knew what notes and chords and everything. I could just play. And if I practice it, I could probably record it that same week and put it up on Spotify if I wanted to, or put it on my page. So I do the same thing with my books. I don't even write until I have my plot on steroids and it's marinated in my head and I have every scene identified. I might have 20 scenes in a book. I don't even touch the page, right? Even the first letter until I have that done. And when I do, it's just like my piano improv. It's just like sweet music. It flows out and I write so fast and I have very limited revisions doing it that way.
Nice.
So,
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, obviously everybody writes very differently and
mhm,
everything works differently for everybody. But coincidentally, the way you described playing the music that way is a little bit more pantsing than you expect. So, I would, depending on, a lot of people might disagree, but understanding the rules of music is one thing, and understanding
right,
the rules of writing is kind of the same. A lot of pantsers don't go in there with, they have a genre in mind. They often have a
right.
character in mind. They often have, the ending in mind, but the rest of it is like, I'm not really sure. and that's where the improv
Right.
comes in. They have a
Hmm.
minor framework and they dive in. So, but interestingly as well, that I think a lot of someone put it this way for me, and it just rings true for myself. Plotters generally their first version is their plot. That is their first draft. It's not actually a draft,
Hmm.
but it's kind of a draft
Right.
because they plotted things
Right.
out. Um, Pantsers like to write out their entire plot, like their entire framework, and that's
Yeah.
part of their plotting, so to speak. It's like, oh, I'll just plot this out in full
Yeah.
format and then revise from there. And that's, I think, where I definitely line. But it
Yeah,
obviously
it's
works,
fair.
and the relation of
Hmm.
music creation is very similar. And I like that you put that in there because it exercises that muscle of creation. So you have a process down. I mean, you've written and
Hmm.
published 12 books plus some that
Yes.
aren't visible. So
Right.
once you get that process down, it just becomes easier and easier. And doing it in music form is only exercising that to be more effective.
Yeah, you're
So
spot on. I mean, my last book, Buffalo Man One, which is my longest book, it's a full novel. It's like 80, at least 8,000 words.
nice,
I wrote the whole book, like actual physically wrote the whole book and had a major it wasn't even a revision. It was just actually my after I did dev edits, my editor wanted me to add about 5 to 6,000 words. I did that all in a month, 1 month.
nice.
Wrote it, edition, edited, twice in 30 days. And so when I first started, there's no way I could do that. And I so when I first started, I watched an interview from James Patterson. He's like, got a plot. So I did that. So I did a plot for my first book ever. It's called Brown Sugar in Minnesota. It was an NPR,
Hey,
Minnesota Public Radio investigative reporter. And I plotted it, and it was like short. It was like 30, 40,000 words. And I finished it in like 3 months. It was pretty good. My second one, I listened to an interview from Lee Child, the Jack Reacher series, because I was a fan of
hmm
him. And he's like, oh, you got to be a pantser. You got to be a discovery writer. So I tried that for my second one. It took me like 2 years to write it. I wasn't even getting writer's block. I was just sitting there like, and I read it like last year, just for the heck of it. I have like a 40-page chase scene that starts in North Dakota and ends in like a swamp in Louisiana. And I'm just like, what was I doing? So that sort of convinced me as well. I need to be a plotter. But yeah, everyone's got a different process and a different mechanism. But that's what convinced me: music and sort of my output ability.
Well, I mean, what you described is exactly the reason why you should do what works for you. Because I
Right.
also tried the plotting route, and now I have outlines of plots that I will never write because I'm bored. I'm just like,
Oh,
I
good
already
point.
wrote it. I
Good
don't
point.
want to write it anymore, right? It kind of spoils it for me when I write it
Mm,
out. And so now I've got stories that are kind of dead for me because I already know what's happened. I already know the ending, and it's just there's no interest in I'm not interested in writing it anymore. So I learned about
it's the right
myself that
point.
plotting's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's no, it's
Um,
a great point.
and in your case, pantsing didn't really work, and that's also fine. It
Right.
doesn't really matter. So obviously, take any advice you get from anybody or podcast with a grain of salt. Try it, definitely
Hmm.
try any method, but also be okay saying, that didn't really work for me. I know myself, I know the way my brain works, and if it didn't work, it's okay to try something else. So, but I'm
Yeah,
curious.
that's
I
good
want to
advice.
before we're running out of short on time, and I have to hear your Idaho story before
Oh, yes. Okay.
before we end
So
here. Was it a negative experience? I hope you
no,
enjoyed
no,
your
no.
time in
It's not.
Idaho.
No, it's okay. So Idaho, being from Minnesota, Idaho really isn't on the way to anywhere, unless I was like going to Seattle, I guess, or something. But so it was going to be like my 45th state I was traveling to, and it was like 6 or 7 years ago. It was just my wife and I. We flew out to California, and we were doing like a northern cross country road trip.
Okay.
And so we woke up in Reno, Nevada in the morning, and we drove straight to Idaho Falls, Idaho, which is 9 hours. I mean, we stopped maybe once to get gas and some big gulps and some Slim Jims, but it was just nine. And I think I drove the whole thing. My wife might say she drove, an hour of it, but so you drive 9 hours in one day, you're feeling it, right? So I remember when we got to Idaho Falls, there was this amazing sunset. I'm talking about when the rays stretch over the entire horizon, red, orange, yellow. And when I got out of the car, I was just like taken back by that. It was awesome. Well, there's like a little viewing area by our hotels in downtown Idaho Falls, and I heard a river, rushing water, and I saw it was Snake River right in front of us. And then I look up, and on the hill, there's this immaculate white LDS church. I'm not Mormon, I'm not non-denominational Christian, but I looked up and it was like glistening in the sunset. And for a moment, I thought, like, did I die in Reno and wake up in heaven in Idaho? I don't know. I think I might have. And my wife like kind of tugs my sleeves, like, hey, let's go check in the hotel. And so we go and we check in, or we go up to the front counter, and the lady, she was super nice. She's like, "Welcome, Mr. Field. We have two room options for you. You can choose whichever one you want, and it's yours." I was like, "Okay, that's pretty sweet." So she goes, "Room number one is a small room with limited amenities, and it's on the top floor and it looks right over the Snake River at our church, our beautiful church on the hill." And if you think the sunset is beautiful, wait till the sunrise, wait till those first rays, tickle the top of the church. And by the way, you can open the window and the Snake River, will vibrate into your room, and it just sounds amazing. And I was like, okay, so that's the room we're gonna take. Yeah, just don't even tell me that one. That's the one we're gonna do. So my wife, she casually grabs my forearm. She's like, well, just out of curiosity, what's the other option? And the lady's like, okay, well, it's on the back side of the hotel. It looks out on the parking lot, but it's our largest suite. And it has a California king bed that is extremely comfortable. And oh, by the way, it has a huge jacuzzi that has a TV above it in the room. So you can watch TV while you're in the hot tub. And I was like, babe, I was like, I don't know how many times we're gonna be to Idaho. Like, I mean, this view, we could find hot tubs, this view. And, she gave me a playful look, and she, looked back at the clerk. She's like, we'll take the suite with the jacuzzi. Now, to my wife's credit, it was amazing. I mean, we binge watched like an entire season of The Office in the hot tub, and we're like all pruny afterwards. And the bed was so comfortable, which felt glorious after 9 hours in the car. But on my one and only trip to Idaho thus far in my life, that was my vivid memory and story that I have from my time there.
That is hilarious. The ironic thing is, I knew exactly what you were going to say about hearing the river and seeing that it's a temple, by the way. I mean, calling it a church
Mm.
isn't wrong, but I actually live in Idaho Falls. So that's exactly what I knew you were going to say when you said you heard the river, looked over the river, saw the building. I was like, oh, you probably saw the temple. So
Yeah.
it's a very iconic view, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of like the only picture that you see of Idaho Falls because like that's all there is. There's the other normal podunk things and oh look, beautiful river and building. So it's just a little bit ironic, but
That is
no, yeah,
funny. Yeah,
that is
I didn't know
hilarious.
you lived there, but yeah, so
Yeah.
I want to come back. I mean, it seems like I've heard from so many people. It's like you could go spend a week or two in Idaho, like go whitewater rafting, go fishing, so I want to come back. I don't want that to be my one experience, but at least it was memorable. I got a
I mean,
story
it's
from it.
it's
So
great. We like it here. It's very small. We moved here from a busier spot down south, so it's nice. It's we like the
yeah.
fewer cars, less traffic, fewer people. We live a little bit out in the country area though, so we're kind of out of the. I wouldn't even call it a city. We're out of town. Um, but it's great. I'm glad that here was your experience because it's
Yeah.
not as this is a more beautiful area. Nothing against the rest of Idaho, but Southeast Idaho has a little bit more green, beautiful areas than if you go a little bit further west, like Boise and Twin Falls. It's just kind of dead desert. So
No,
picked a
that's
good
good to know. Well,
spot.
next time I come back, I'll send you a note. We'll go canoeing down Snake River,
Please,
and
yeah, we
it'll
can
be
hang out,
great.
go river rafting somewhere. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
But and you wrote a short story about that. So as we're getting into the end of the podcast, where can people find more information about you and your books and short stories?
Yeah, so I just want to first of all say thank you for investing your time in the show, and like, allowing authors like myself to share our stories. I know you have, your hands full. You have a basketball team with a couple subs. I don't know if you and your wife are working towards a baseball team, but yeah, so thank you for doing it. Super cool. Keep it up. So just thank you and for having me on. In terms of an offer, so if any of your listeners are in book clubs, or they're a member or the organizer, if you guys read one of my books, you can send me a note, joe@legendsuniverse.net, or just go to my website, legendsuniverse.net. Send me a note and I'll Zoom, FaceTime in, and you can just grill me. You can just grill me. Because every scene in my book has a story like the one I just shared you. And so if you want to know the story behind it, or you just want to ask me why I did such and such and call me out. So that's an offer. All my books are on Amazon. So you can pull up in the Amazon app, and type Joe Field and Buffalo Man, and I'll pop up. Or Joe Penn would be proud of me. I'm now selling hardcover pocketbook editions
Wow.
of my book on my website, exclusive directly on my website.
Very
So
cool.
there's that. And then, yeah, if you want to listen to my piano music, it's on Spotify. Just Joe Field and put Minnesota. It's my first album on there. So there you go.
I'm gonna check. I listen to YouTube music, so I'm gonna go find it.
Awesome.
Um, see if I can. I love listening to music. See what maybe I'll listen to it and come up with whatever story comes out of it, and then just send it to you and be like, how closely
Yes.
aligned is this whatever you wrote? That'd be a fun experiment.
You should do that, especially because it's instrumental. And so there are stories behind it, but we'll see where your brain goes.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that would
there's
be
no
awesome.
way it would align. That would be like insane if it did, but it would be hilarious.
Yeah, that
In
would be
any case,
awesome.
thank you very much. I really like meeting other authors. Part of the reason I started this podcast was just to connect with other authors, connect listeners to other authors, and what a very generous and exciting offer to jump on a Zoom with people reading your book.
Yeah.
If you're listening to that, take advantage of that because that would be really cool to have the author join a meeting about your book and add whatever his 2 cents is about it. So,
Right.
well, very good. Thank you
Cool.
again for your time. This has been an excellent conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. The pleasure is all mine. Take care. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I know I did with Joe. He's a very lively, positive person. His connections with Idaho are just really funny. It's pretty impressive that someone could visit all of the different states. I know I'm not even anywhere close to visiting all the states in the US, but his experience and finding that creativity, living his creative best life is pretty awesome. Hopefully you've enjoyed that positivity. So next week we'll be talking to Jim Perry about seizing opportunities in your life. So Jim went through a lot of his life without writing a book, just thinking about writing a book, and then when his wife passed away, he found himself having a little bit more time, and it was a very cathartic experience for him to write the book that's been in his heart and in his mind for so many years. He's also a veteran. He was in the military, and he talks a little bit about that experience and how that resulted in the book that he wrote. So I think you're going to want to stick around for that conversation next week. He was really delightful, very positive, and his insights on life were just very grounding for someone like myself who hopefully still has a lot of years in his life. So that being said, yeah, join me next week for that. And of course, if you'd like to join me for the podcast, just head to thecasualauthor.com, fill out the pitch form, or of course, you can just email me at dan@thecasualauthor.com. Would love to chat with you. Love to hear your thoughts. If you have any feedback about the podcast or you loved or disliked any of the episodes, feel free to let me know. I like to hear how things are going and if you're enjoying it. So thank you again for listening today, and I hope to see you next week.